been last couple weeks. It seems like, I'm hoping that it's about done, but it seems like that there has been a more or less a plague that has gone through Brooksville. That whether it's a head cold, where people are coughing, or whether it's a stomach bug where you're just not feeling good, or as it got in my house when all four of us started with Joshua, got sick 2 weeks ago. So we're past the period. Don't worry, everybody in the first row is regretting sitting so close, but no. But we're past that period. We're good now. And before I forget, actually, I got so excited. We're going to dismiss the kids. All right. So if the kids, you're going to go back through that back door if you want to be involved in the kids ministry there. And so Miss Vicki is back there standing by that door. You guys are invited to do that. And we are going to continue on in here. But as I was saying here, that last week we got sick. We actually had a friends of mine dinner on Monday night. A few of you were out there, and about 15 minutes before people started showing up, Josh was doing fine. He looked fine. He's playing. He's running around like a 3-year-old does. About 15 minutes before, all of a sudden he started acting a little bit funny. He started not acting very, like he was very wanting to play and not wanting to be around anybody. And then all of a sudden, he kept getting worse and worse and worse. And at the end of the night, right as people were leaving, we got done with dinner, he just threw up. And it's like, uh-oh, this is not good. Because when you have kids, then you know that it's not going to stop with one kid. Like, it's something's going to happen here. And so next morning, Bethany got it, then I got it, and then Micah got it. And it's not very fun trying to take care of your sick 10-month-old or 19-month-old baby whenever you're also sick, whenever you have to take a break to go get the towel to clean up your little child. Oh, man, it was very rough. Now, one thing that I do know is that whenever I was sick, and I still sometimes have to be around people, unfortunately, but I always try to be respectful, right? I always try to keep my distance, not shake any hands. But it is kind of funny whenever you tell somebody that you're sick, because usually what happens is you say, oh, man, I'm fighting a cold, I'm fighting and you know what they do. They all of a sudden, you notice the hands go in the pocket, right? You know, all of a sudden, oh man, I'm so sorry. I'll be praying for you. That's so bad. If you need anything, I'll be over there, and just holler out, right? Because so many of us, and then just that time of year, even whenever sickness is going around, we don't want to get sick. We don't want to interact with people that might get us sick, because that's just going to lay us up. It's going to be a hassle. We're not going to feel well. And so our tendency, and understandably so, I do the exact same thing. I always wash my hands after Sunday service, right? For as many hands I shake. But that's the tendency. But we're going to look at what Jesus did. We've been going through the last few months the Sermon on the Mount, the greatest sermon that's ever been preached. We're now going to see exactly how he follows up on that. And so the title of this message is that Jesus starts his ministry at the bottom. Jesus starts his ministry at the bottom, really with the least of these. And we're going to see what that means now. So if you have your Bibles, you can turn over to Matthew chapter 8. Matthew chapter 8. And we will be starting in verse number 1. The very first point, which is also one of the fill-in-the-blanks in your bulletin, is that Jesus touches the isolated. Jesus touches the isolated. And we're going to be in Matthew chapter 8, verse 1. Before I go on, let me pray one more time. Lord, I pray that you would just bless now as we open up your word and study you. Lord, I pray that nobody remember my words, but only your words, Lord, that you would be here with us, that you would reveal yourself to us in a new and special way. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Matthew chapter 8, verse 1. Let's start reading here. It says, when he came down from the mountain, great crowds followed him. All right, stop right there. So we say, why is he coming down from a mountain? Was he just a hiker that liked to go in the mountains? No. If you remember, once again, that the last few months we've been talking about the Sermon on the Mount. That mount was the mountain. So he just had finished preaching that sermon. He walks down, and it says that great crowds were following him. At this point in his ministry, this is when his popularity was the highest. The people loved him because he started doing miracles. He was teaching things. He was kind of sticking it to the man, if you will, the religious leaders of that day. And so all of a sudden, the crowds were just really following him everywhere that he went. As we're going to see, not all of them had the right motives in doing that, but they was just crowded everywhere he went. In verse 2, and behold, a leopard came to him. And behold, a leopard came. Now, whenever we read that, it sounds so peaceful. But that word behold, you shouldn't ever read it like behold. You should read it like behold. All right, that's the thing that he's trying to get us across. They didn't have his ways to point things out in the Greek, and so the Greek, whenever it says behold, it means draw your attention. Something important is about to happen. Something significant is about to happen. Some of you just woke up, and that's the significant portion there. But what he's saying here is something's going to happen, and the next phrase was actually a very startling and inappropriate, and really just a phrase that it just would not even be possible in the normal everyday life of a Jew, because it says, behold, a leopard came to him. A leopard came to him. A leopard approached him. That just didn't happen in that time period. I think we kind of understand a little bit of leprosy. Today it's called Hansen's disease, but it's oftentimes when we think of leprosy, we think of limbs falling off, right? That is just the disease that makes your nose fall off, your arms fall off, or whatever. But what actually this was, it was likely started in Egypt whenever they went down to Egypt and were slaves there. But then whenever they came out, they brought leprosy with them. This leprosy would oftentimes, it would start by making your limbs numb to the touch. And then all of a sudden you'd start to get splotches on your skin that would be turn white and kind of scaly or ashy there, and because of poor circulation. But then even more than that, what would happen is that it would also impact your internal systems as well. Your nervous system, your immune system, everything was attacked by this leprosy disease. And so what would happen is not that you would actually lose your limbs, it would actually limit you from feeling. And so it wasn't a painful disease, but oftentimes you would have this disease, and if you don't realize it, if you don't have, you're walking barefoot across hot pavement, and you don't realize that it's hot because you don't have any feeling in your feet. Or you have an itch, and you start to rub it, and your skin is already braille, and there's some sores on it, and you keep rubbing, and you end up start to rub off your body parts. It was a very disturbing disease to see. Even more than that, what would happen is that it was considered unclean. And so it was a highly contagious disease. Apparently only like 10%. Now we know only about 10% of the population actually carries the gene to even get it. But they didn't know that back then. They just knew that it was highly contagious. And so what would happen is that they, if you were a leopard, they knew that it was contagious, and the Old Testament told them. And so they made laws around leopards. And so you were not allowed, if you were a leopard, you were not allowed to get within 6 feet of another person. So every time that we shake our hand, every time you give a hug, every time you interact closely enough to have a conversation, that's all gone. You're completely isolated. Get this, if it was a particular windy day, you were not allowed, or you would have to start yelling, unclean, 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 150 feet away from somebody. Half of a football field. Whenever you start seeing somebody come down the road, you already started out there, unclean, 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 and people didn't want you around, right? And this was much worse than an average cold or the average flu, and so people would actually pick up stones and start throwing them at the leopards if they got too close. There was some rabbis that would say, hey, if a leopard walked down the street earlier that day, I would not buy any food from that street. Apparently, whenever you get close to a leopard, you can almost, they emit a smell, so you can even smell them whenever they walk down the street. They said if you spend enough time around them, you can almost even taste it in your mouth. It was a sin that it was a disease that pictured what sin was like. Because it destroyed you from the inside out, and it completely isolated you. And to the worst for the Jew, you weren't ever allowed to go back in the temple. You couldn't even go back in the city anymore. You were kept outside of all that. You were completely isolated. And so here, did you catch it? There's a great crowd, lots of people, And then all of a sudden, they're crowding around Jesus. All of a sudden, in the back, you hear, unclean, unclean. I can imagine that crowd starts to separate pretty quickly. Oh, uh-oh. Get back. There's a leopard here. He shouldn't even been walking there, but he had to see Jesus. So he came to Jesus and knelt down, verse 2 still, and knelt down before him. That word knelt is actually prostate. He laid flat on the ground before him, saying, Lord, if you will, you can make me clean. If you will, you can make me clean. First of all, notice the leopard's position towards Jesus. It's obvious to see exactly how he thought of Jesus, because he called him Lord, and he was already laying down flat. Both of those things you don't do unless you highly honor somebody, right? I've been waiting for somebody to kneel down before me since I got here. I'm still waiting. Nobody seems to take me up on that. Right, but no, because you don't honor me. No, but we don't honor people like that in our culture. But in that culture, that's how you showed honor to somebody. You would get down, you kneel down before them, and he said, Lord, and he showed exactly who he knew that Jesus was. And he said something to him that I think we all can read. He says, if you will, you can make me clean. If you will, you can make me clean. Part of my job that I love is that I get to spend time in prayer every day. I pray a lot for sicknesses and diseases, and to see the Beth sending out all our prayer requests every single week as soon as we're here, and we take that to the Lord. I think, though, this phrase right here shows us a lot of what it is to pray whenever you're sick. Lord, if you will, you can make me clean. It's an understanding. It's a humble approach. He doesn't demand it. He doesn't say, God, if you love me, you'll make me clean. He doesn't try to manipulate God. He just says, Lord, I know you can. I know you're able to. And so if you will it, please do it. And that should be our approach whenever we're sick, whenever we have a problem. Know that sometimes God is going to heal all of us, but it might not be in this life. And so we have to understand that. We have to know that whenever we approach him to say, God, I want to be healed. I pray, I believe that you can. I have faith that you can. I know you can, Lord, but let it be your will that's being done. But look at what Jesus says. Verse 3, and Jesus stretched out his hand and touched him, saying, I will be clean. Now, in that moment, once again, I can tell you're not first century Jewish listeners, because when it says that Jesus stretched out his hand and touched him, that should have been a gasping moment. Like, I can't believe he just did that. Like, listen, whenever I said that I was sick, I never saw Jeff run quicker than I seen him on last week. When I said that I had a stomach bug, man, he was gone. He was like Batman. He was just split out of there, out of nowhere. But Jesus, when everybody else was spreading out, when everybody else was scooting away, maybe even trying to pick up the rock, saying, oh man, we got to take this guy to town, Jesus actually goes in and he reaches out and he touches him. You don't do that with a leopard. For all they knew, that's how you caught it. Said that a couple things would make you unclean. There's 61 things actually in the Jewish law that make you unclean. Worst thing was to touch a dead body. Number 2 was to touch a leopard. It's just not something that you did. Jesus saw the man that came down, knelt before him, ready to prostrate himself, lay down flat, and he reached out and he touched him. That's the type of Jesus that we serve. The one that's isolated, the one that's all alone, the one that, he probably hasn't felt human touch in several years. This was the first time that anybody's ever touched him. He doesn't get the touch of his family. He doesn't get the touch of his kids, the touch of his spouse. He hasn't felt human touch in years, and Jesus reaches out and he touches them. And he says, I will be clean. And then did you notice what it says? Immediately, as soon as he touched him, the leprosy was gone. We have a lot of good medicine, and I'm thankful for the doctors and the medicine and the hospitals that we have. But there ain't no doctor, there ain't no medicine that can just say, hey, you're healed. There's nothing. Even there's no magic pill that as soon as you take it, you're just all of a sudden better. We can't even cure the common cold that quick. And I'm miserable when I get it. But Jesus goes and he takes the worst type of disease known to them at the time and says, you're clean. You're clean. Now notice he says you're clean, not just you're healed. That's what he asked for. He asked, make me clean. Because leprosy made you unclean. Like I said before, he couldn't even go in the temple. He couldn't even worship God in the way that the Jews were wanting to worship him out in the temple with everybody else. He had to be isolated. He had to be separated from the rest of the crowd. But Jesus brings him in and says, I will be clean. Which brings us to the big idea of point one, which is when everyone stays away, Jesus steps in. When everyone stays away, Jesus steps in. Let's keep moving on here. We have one more miracle that Jesus does. Verse 5. The second point, actually, is Jesus brings in the outcast. Jesus brings in the outcast. Let's start reading verse 5 now. He says, when he had entered Capernaum, the centurion came forward to him, appealing to him. I'll stop right there. So Capernaum actually was his home base. We know that Jesus was born in Bethlehem. He grew up in Nazareth. But then while he was doing ministry, he actually started to do ministry in Capernaum. That was his homeland. He did more miracles in Capernaum and the surrounding areas than anywhere else. But as we flip forward, whenever we get to Matthew chapter 11, we're going to see that Jesus then eventually says, woe to you, Capernaum, because if the miracles that were done here was done in Sodom and Gomorrah, they would have believed. And so eventually they see Jesus, they see him do all these miracles and do all these wonderful things, but still turn their back on him, which is a good example for us, because so many times we say, man, if I just saw God move, and if God just did things that I could see, if he came through a little bit more, then I'd believe in him. No, you wouldn't. No, you wouldn't, because they saw a dude get healed from leprosy. They saw paralytics, paralyzed people rise up and walk, and they still ended up turning their back on Jesus. It has nothing to do with what Jesus does. It's everything to do with what you believe in your heart. And so he comes to him, and there's a centurion came forward to him. That's a Roman commander. A Roman commander of 100 men there, a centurion, 100 men. Every time that centurion is mentioned in the Gospels, it's always in a good light, interestingly enough. But he comes to him. And in the book of Luke, actually, it gives us a little bit more information. Luke chapter 7. I'm going to flip down there. I think it's kind of out of order. I'm sorry for the slides here, so I'm not sure if it'll be on the page. But Luke chapter 7, verses 3 and 5 says, it gives a little bit more information. It says, when the centurion heard about Jesus, he sent to him elders of the Jews, asking him to come and heal his servant. And when they came to Jesus, they pleaded with him earnestly, saying, he is worthy to have you do this for him, for he loves our nation, and he is the one who built us our synagogue. So it fills it in a little bit more, that not only was this man a Roman soldier, but it kind of explains as to why he got even the attention of Jesus in the first place. The Jewish leaders actually came to Jesus on the behalf of the centurion, which is a normal thing, and they would have said, hey, by the way, this man, he's rich. he built our synagogue. He's done us a few favors. We'd really appreciate, Jesus, if you go over there and you heal this boy. This slave boy is what it is. And so they ask him, and Jesus says, I will. So read verse 6 now. It says, verse 6 and 7. Lord, my servant is lying paralyzed at home, suffering terribly. Back in Matthew 8. Verse 7. And he said to him, I will come and heal him. So they ask, here's this little servant boy. It shows, one, that the character of this man. Because in that time, slaves were slaves. They were considered property. There was no laws about them. For the Roman person, if you had a slave and you were Roman, you could kill him without any recourse. They were considered property, no different than an animal that you own. And so here's this man, here's this little slave boy, it's a little boy, but yet he cared enough about that little boy to try to get him help. It showed the character of that man. And then notice what he calls Jesus once again, Lord, at the start of verse 6. Lord, my servant is lying paralyzed. And to compare this to Luke, we see that he's a God-fearing man. He loved the Lord. And so he comes to Jesus now and says, Lord, can you heal him? He says, I will come. This is the only time that I could find where Jesus actually makes mention of that he's actually going to come and see him. But in verse 8 now, but the centurion replied, I am not worthy to have you come under my roof, but only say the word and my servant will be healed. I'm not worthy. It means I don't have enough work. I'm not great enough. I don't have enough to let you even come inside my roof. Once again, he came to Jesus in the right way. He didn't come demanding things. He didn't come saying, Lord, if you love me, you're going to do this, Lord. If you don't do it, then you don't love me. He says, I'm nothing, Lord. And this man was important. This man had commanded an army. And right, one thing, because the Romans were automatically more important than the Jews, because it was the Roman Empire. What's also significant about this, though, is he was more important by Roman standards. But by Jewish standards, he was nothing, right? They hated the Romans. They didn't want anything to do with the Romans because they came in and they took over Jerusalem. And honestly, there's a lot of people think that not only was he a Gentile, but that he was even Samaritan, which is the lowest of the low, because oftentimes in the Roman Empire, they would take out the leaders of the people that might not like them, the neighbors that might not like them, and the Jews and the Samaritans just didn't like each other because the Samaritans were half Jewish, half Gentile. And so several people have argued well that he was a Samaritan. So he looked like the worst of the worst, the lowest of the low. And that's who Jesus went to. And not only to him, but he went to slaves. Every day, apparently, Jews in that time, men, they would pray, Lord, I'm thankful that I'm not a Gentile, a slave, or a woman. It was what they would pray every single time. You know, his first 3 miracles was a sick leopard, which was also looked down on, and then a slave of a Gentile, and then the next miracle that we'll look at next week is to a woman. Everything that people looked down on, everything that they said, no, this man is not one of us. This man is not a part of us. Yeah, by Luke, they told us that he built the synagogue, but Matthew doesn't mention that. Why? Because Matthew wanted to make a point. This man was low. This man did not deserve any type of recognition from the Jewish mind, but yet Jesus stepped in and said, I will heal him. Let's keep on reading here. Verse 9. For I, too, am a man under authority, with soldiers under me. And I say to one, go, and he goes. And to another, come, and he comes. And to my servant, do this, and he does it. So the reason why he says, you don't need to come inside my house, he says, I also have authority. And when I tell one of my soldiers to go, he goes. I wish my kids were this well behaved. I don't understand this myself, this type of authority. But he says when they come, they come. And so he recognized that Jesus had the spiritual authority just like he had the physical authority over the Roman Empire. He says, go, and he goes. And so if you just say the word, Jesus, then my servant will be healed. Verse 10, when Jesus heard this, he marveled. Marvel. Every other time that word is used, it's always talking about people marveling over Jesus and the things that he did. The faith of this Roman soldier, this Gentile, this man that wasn't known to be a believer in God, that by all outside purposes had the faith that made Jesus marvel. What better goal is there than that? That when Jesus looks at us, he says, I'm marveling at this. I'm astonished at this. This is amazing. I want that type of faith. He said, those who follow him, truly I tell you, with no one in Israel have I found such faith. Verse 11, I tell you, many will come from east and west and recline at the table. with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. Verse 12, while the sons of the kingdom will be thrown into outer darkness, in the place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Jesus. This book of Matthew is written to the Jews, but you wouldn't know it off of this passage. Because already, it was probably already offensive for the Jews to say, why in the world would he be helping out a Roman soldier? Why would he want to take time out of his day to help out the people that are oppressing us, that are commanding us, that have overtaken us? Why would he do that? But not only does he do that, not only does he just marvel at his faith, he says, oh, and by the way, I haven't seen this amount of faith by anybody in the kingdom of Israel. That was just a stab and kind of turn right inside their hearts. And he says there's going to come a day, and this is significant because we are currently still in this day. He says that people will come from the east and from the west. That's where all the Gentiles are, from the east and the west. That's where you and me, for the majority of us, are. We are the Gentiles coming from the east and the west. And it says that they were going to recline at the table of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. In that time period, whenever they ate, they would recline at the table. You would lay down on each side, and there would be this kind of a horseshoe shape. And you would kind of recline, and you recline into each other's back. It was kind of a weird, intimate thing that we don't do anymore, which I'm thankful for. But they would lay down, and they would be there. But it says that he was at the table with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That we, the Gentiles who come in, are sitting at the table with them, meaning that we're also guests of honor with the most Jewish patriarchs that you could find, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. We are brought in there. But then it says, and the sons of the kingdom, that's the Jewish people, are going to be thrown out. And then notice what it says, into the outer darkness. Into the outer darkness. Not just thrown out in darkness, but that outer darkness was a place, and they're going to be thrown into it. And it clarifies what that place is. It says, in that place, at the end of verse 12, there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. A common metaphor for hell. Later on, we still haven't reached this period, but God hasn't turned his back on Israel. He's not done with Israel. He's going to come back, and at the end of this time, he's going to take the church out, and then he's going to deal with Israel, and there's going to be a great revival turning back there. And so we should be praying for Israel, for their safety. Right now, there's bombs going off, as there always is, but even right now, there's more than that. So we can pray for their safety, but even more than that, we pray for their salvation. Because right now they don't see that Jesus is the Messiah. And that's the only way to heaven. Whether you're Jewish or you're Gentile, the only way to heaven is that seeing that Jesus Christ is the Son of God, that he died on the cross for our sins. And when we believe in him, when we put in trust in him, that's when we have eternal life. Verse 13, last verse, and then we'll be wrapping it up here. Verse 13. And to the centurion, Jesus said, go, let it be done for you as you have believed. And the servant was healed at that very moment. So after Jesus marveled over the faith that he showed, he said, now go. Go. Which still would take faith to just leave, to let Jesus stay there and you leave. But yet, believes, and at that very moment, his servant was healed. Which brings us to the big idea, the point 2, last little section in your bulletin, which is when others look down, Jesus picks up. When others look down, Jesus picks up. A couple things here as we start to apply this for our lives. Number 1. It's easy to look at this and say, okay, Jesus helped the isolated. He reached out and he touched the sick and the poor. He reached out and he helped the people that nobody else wanted to help. So I should be like Jesus, and I should help the people, and I should be kind to the poor and be kind to the sick. And that's good, and we're going to apply it that way in just a minute, but I don't want you to miss this point. If that's all the way that you look at it, you kind of miss the whole point of the passage. Because in this story, when you're looking through and you're trying to see what to do, first you have to realize who you are in the story, who I am in the story. We're the leopard. We're the sick. We're the one that nobody else wanted. We're the one that everybody turned their back on, that was isolated, that was rejected by God and all of his people, and that is who we are. When nobody else wanted to come around us, Jesus came down, and he came down and he touched us. He's offering that to us. And so first, don't miss who you are in this story. You are the leopard. I am the leopard. I am the poor slave boy that doesn't deserve anything, that hasn't earned anything. But as Christians now, we can go and take a look and say, okay, this is how Jesus treated people. Maybe I should treat people like that. I'm not naturally a person that likes hugs, actually. Now, look, hear me out first, all right? Because I've grown to like them. As part of a pastor, one of my classes, I was all just hugging. I'm just kidding. But you kind of have to grow into that. But naturally, I've never really met a person just out of the blue and just said, you know what, you need a hug, brother. That's just not who I am. Once I get to know you, then yeah, I like that, and it's a good way to show love and everything like that. But it's just not my natural inclination. A while back, I went to a church, and I'm not going to share too much details because this is going to be online later, but I went to a church where there was an individual who caught a disease. He caught a disease in that it was very highly contagious, and it was actually a disease that could, by all accounts, be deadly. And so he actually was coming to our church, and several people in the church actually caught the disease. And so eventually the CDC had to take him and quarantine him for a few months. And so I had some small interactions with this gentleman while he was quarantined, and a few calls and texts and things like that. Not much, but a few. All of a sudden, though, after 3 months, we hadn't really heard from him. 3 months, we get a group text message saying, "Hey, I'm clear. Can somebody give me a ride to church?" And in that moment, it was a group text message. And so I looked at it, and I was like, I hope somebody else replies to this, right? Right back in there. Because it was 40 minutes out of my way. I was like, man, I really don't want to get a deadly disease. A couple minutes later, phone goes off. Sorry, I can't do it. No. And I'm the only one that's left. And so I was like, okay, I'm gonna give this, I'll do it. I feel like I should, I'll do it. So I went ahead and I told him, okay, I'll be there this time. I got over to the place that he was staying, knocked on the door. Once again, it was one of these, hey, good to see you, welcome back, we're so happy to see you, come on, get inside the car. I hope you don't mind that all 4 of the windows are open right now. Doing one of these, this is going to help. After that service came in, and the service was done, he gave me a hug. And that was probably the first hug that he's had in a while. And that's exactly what he needed. And as far as I know, I'm not dead yet. But we all have the opportunity. I went reluctantly. Don't mistake that as me pointing attention to myself. I did not want to do that. I wanted to stay clear away from him. But when I was thinking back about that compared to what my Jesus did to me, because what we don't see is that this sin that he took on, this sin that he came down and he said, not only am I going to save you from sin, I'm going to take that sin and I'm going to put it on myself. And I'm going to take that and I'm going to carry it to the cross. Everything that was dirty, every type of guilt that you have, every type of shame that you have, everything that you ever done wrong, not only am I going to save you from it, I'm going to take it on myself. I'm going to kill it myself. There's no way for us to experience that love outside of love. We all have the opportunity to go to him and say, Lord, please, I know you can, but you save me from this. For some of you, it might be salvation. You might need to be saved and come to Jesus. For some of you, it might be a spiritual battle that it's time to come to Jesus too. And say, Lord, I tried everything else, but it's time for me to kneel down and give it over to you. For some of you, it might be a physical illness, a physical battle that you are fighting. You say, Lord, I need to come down and lay this down at your feet. We're going to pray here. And then we're going to come up here and sing one more song, and then we'll be dismissed. Let's pray. Father, we love you. We thank you, Lord, that you did not come just for the healthy, that you did not come just for those that have it all put together, but you came for somebody like me. And I was far away from you, Lord. You reached out and you touched me. And so I pray for each and every one of us that are here today, that even if we are running away from you, if we're actively seeking to turn and to avoid you and to do everything in our power to not follow you, I pray that you would reach out and touch lives today, that we would leave different than when we came in. We love you, Lord. In Jesus' name we pray. Please stand and sing with us on this.